Everything you need to know about Final Fantasy. The Final Fantasy series is one of the most popular and well-loved gaming franchises of all time. Spanning multiple console generations, the series has captivated gamers with its rich stories, lovable characters, and exciting gameplay. While each entry in the series is special in its own way, there are some that stand out above the rest. Let's take a look at some of its history, investigate the most popular entries in the series and find out about the best weapons, characters, and more. Final Fantasy truly is the best of the best when it comes to video game storytelling, world building, and characters. It is a masterpiece in every sense of the word, and is without a doubt one of the most influential and important video game series of all time. From the very first game in the series, Final Fantasy I, to the most recent release, Final Fantasy XV, the franchise has constantly pushed the boundaries of what is possible in video gaming, and has always strived to give players the best possible gaming experience. The saga of Final Fantasy is a true testament to the power of video gaming as an art form, and is sure to continue to inspire and entertain gamers for many years to come. In the late 1990s, the Final Fantasy video game franchise was in a slump. The once proud franchise was struggling to find its footing, and fans were growing increasingly frustrated. However, all of that changed with the release of Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII was a game changer, not just for the franchise, but for the entire video game industry. It was a massive, ambitious game that pushed the boundaries of what was possible on the PlayStation console. It was also a commercial success, selling over 11 million copies worldwide. Final Fantasy VII was followed by an equally successful sequel, Final Fantasy VIII. Final Fantasy VIII was a more personal story than its predecessor, focusing on the relationship between two main characters, Squall and Rinoa. It was also a critical success, earning high praise from fans and critics alike. The next game in the series, Final Fantasy IX, took the franchise back to its roots. It was a return to the more light-hearted, fantasy-based storytelling of the early games in the series. Final Fantasy IX was a critical and commercial success, selling over 5 million copies worldwide. The most recent entry in the series, Final Fantasy XV, was released in 2016. Set in a world where a global peace treaty has ended a long-running war, the game follows the journey of Crown Prince Noctis Lucis Selim, who travels to the city of Alticia to marry Lunafreya Nox Floret. The game's main story revolves around Noctis's quest to reclaim his homeland from the forces of the Niflheim Empire. The Final Fantasy series is one of the most iconic and beloved video game franchises of all time. It has spawned numerous spin-offs, sequels, and adaptations, and has had a profound impact on the gaming industry. The series is known for its expansive and detailed worlds, its complex and engaging stories, and its iconic characters. The Final Fantasy series is truly a gaming legend. But first, how did everything start? The Final Fantasy series is a video game series developed and published by Square Enix, formerly Square. The series began in 1987 as an eponymous role-playing game developed by Square, and has since grown to include 15 main games, as well as numerous spin-offs and related media. It is one of the most commercially successful video game franchises, with over 140 million units sold worldwide as of March 2013. The series has its roots in Square's earlier titles, particularly the action role-playing games developed by Hironobu Sakaguchi, the company's founder. Sakaguchi took inspiration from popular fantasy games such as Dungeons & Dragons and Wizardry, and created his own unique system for the games. The first two games in the series, Final Fantasy I and II, were released in Japan in 1987 and 1988 respectively. They were followed by a direct sequel, Final Fantasy III, in 1990. Final Fantasy IV, released in 1991, was the first in the series to introduce the Active Time Battle (ATB) system, which has become a staple of the series. Subsequent titles were released in Japan throughout the early and mid-1990s, including two direct sequels, Final Fantasy V in 1992, and Final Fantasy VI in 1994. The latter game's success in Japan prompted Square to develop a more innovative sequel, which was released in 1997 as Final Fantasy VII, which catapulted the series to global fame. This was followed by a series of spin-offs and side stories in the form of Final Fantasy Tactics and its sequel, Vagrant Story, as well as the theatrical release Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. Final Fantasy VII was a watershed release for the series, becoming the first main entry to be released in North America and Europe, and the first to be released on a Sony console. It was also the first main entry in the series to make use of 3D graphics. The success of Final Fantasy VII led to a series of sequels and spin-offs, including an ongoing series of direct sequels, beginning with Final Fantasy VIII in 1999. Final Fantasy IX, released in 2000, was the last main entry in the series to be released on a Nintendo console. The series took a new direction with the release of Final Fantasy X in 2001, the first main entry to be developed exclusively for the PlayStation 2. It was also the first entry in the series to make use of voice acting, and featured a new system known as the Conditional Turn-Based Battle (CTB) system. The success of Final Fantasy X prompted a direct sequel, Final Fantasy X2, which was released in 2003. The series' popularity continued with the release of Final Fantasy XI in 2002, the first main entry in the series to be released online. It was also the first entry in the series to make use of the cross-platform play feature, allowing players on different consoles to play together. Final Fantasy XI was followed by a sequel, Final Fantasy XII, in 2006. The series' next main entry, Final Fantasy XIII, was released in 2009. The game was developed using the Crystal Tools engine, and made use of the Active Time Battle Lite (ATB Lite) system. It was followed by a sequel, Final Fantasy XIII-2, in 2011. The series' most recent main entry, Final Fantasy XV, was released in 2016. The game was developed using the Luminous engine, and made use of the Active Time Battle (ATB) system. Overall, the Final Fantasy series has been generally well received by critics, and is one of the most commercially successful video game franchises of all time, even featuring collaborations with other video games, such as Super Smash Bros. Noteworthy characters in all of Final Fantasy. While the Final Fantasy series features a wide variety of characters, there are a few that stand out above the rest as being the most mythical. Here are 4 of the most mythical characters of the Final Fantasy saga. 1. Sephiroth. Sephiroth is one of the main antagonists of the Final Fantasy series and is considered to be one of the strongest characters in the entire series, or even all of video game history. He was once a highly decorated soldier and one of the most powerful characters in the series, but after being seduced by the power of the dark side, he became a ruthless villain. Sephiroth is known for his strength, speed, and swordsmanship, as well as his ability to control the life stream, which is the life force of the planet. 2. Tidus. Tidus is the main protagonist of Final Fantasy X and an important character in Final Fantasy X2. He is a young man from the city of Zanarkand who is transported to the world of Spira after it is destroyed by Sin. Tidus is a skilled athlete and swordsman, and he uses his abilities to help the people of Spira in their fight against Sin. He is also known for his outgoing and optimistic personality, which helps to inspire those around him. 3. Lightning. Lightning is the main protagonist of Final Fantasy XIII, one of the newest entries in the series. She is a skilled soldier who is chosen by the gods to save the world from the forces of chaos. Lightning is known for her strength, determination, and fighting abilities, as well as her cool and collected personality. She is also one of the few female protagonists in the series, which makes her even more iconic. 4. Cloud Strife. Cloud is the main protagonist of Final Fantasy VII and is one of the most popular and iconic characters in the series. He is a former soldier who joins forces with a group of rebels known as Avalanche to take on the corrupt megacorporation Shinra. Cloud is known for his strength, bravery, and fighting abilities, as well as his cool and aloof personality. He is also one of the few characters in the series who wields a sword as his primary weapon, making him even more mythical. Our favorite weapons in Final Fantasy. The Final Fantasy series is known for its unique and varied weapons, and the best weapons in the series are no exception. From the powerful and iconic Masamune to the versatile and deadly Zweihander, the weapons in Final Fantasy are as varied as the series itself. We've compiled some of the best. 1. The Masamune is undoubtedly the most iconic weapon in the series, and for good reason. It is the weapon of choice for the series protagonist, Cloud Strife, and has appeared in almost every game in the series. The Masamune is a massive sword that is nearly as tall as Cloud himself, and is said to be the only weapon that can rival the legendary Excalibur. The Masamune is known for its incredible strength and durability, and is capable of dealing massive amounts of damage. 2. The Zweihander is another iconic weapon in the series, and is the primary weapon of the series' main antagonist, Sephiroth. The Zweihander is a massive two-handed sword that is even larger than the Masamune. It is incredibly heavy and difficult to wield, but Sephiroth is more than capable of using it to devastating effect. The Zweihander is known for its incredible strength and sharpness, and is capable of inflicting serious damage on even the strongest of foes. 3. The Ultima weapon is the most powerful weapon in the series, and is only available to those who have mastered the art of magic. The Ultima weapon is incredibly powerful and can easily destroy even the strongest of foes. It is also incredibly difficult to obtain, and only the most skilled and powerful mags can hope to wield it. 4. The Excalibur is the most legendary weapon in the series, and is said to be the only weapon that can rival the Masamune. The Excalibur is incredibly powerful and can easily destroy even the strongest of foes. It is also incredibly difficult to obtain, and only the most skilled and powerful warriors can hope to wield it. 5. The Ragnarok is another incredibly powerful weapon, and is the primary weapon of the series' protagonist, Tidus. The Ragnarok is a massive two-handed sword that is even larger than the Masamune and the Zweihander. It is incredibly heavy and difficult to wield, but Tidus is more than capable of using it to devastating effect. The Ragnarok is known for its incredible strength and sharpness, and is capable of inflicting serious damage on even the strongest of foes. The Final Fantasy series is home to many unique and powerful weapons, and these are just a few of the best. Whether you're looking for incredible strength, unparalleled power, or just a weapon that looks really cool, the weapons of Final Fantasy have something for everyone. The best vehicles in Final Fantasy. There are so many amazing vehicles that have been featured throughout the Final Fantasy series. It's hard to choose just a few, but we've managed to narrow it down to our favorites. The first entry on our list is the iconic airship. These massive flying machines have been a staple of the series since the very first game. They've taken many different forms over the years, but they've always been a reliable way to travel between locations. Next up is the Regalia, the royal carriage of Noctis and his friends in Final Fantasy XV. This luxurious vehicle is equipped with everything you could need for a road trip, including a built-in kitchen and a comfortable bed. It's the perfect way to travel in style. If you're looking for something a little more combat-focused, the Magitech armor from Final Fantasy VI is a great choice. These massive suits of armor are powered by magic, and they're capable of annihilating anything in their path. Just be careful not to overheat them. Finally, we have the Chocobo. These adorable creatures have been a staple of the series since Final Fantasy II. They're fast, they're cute, and they can even fly. What's not to love? That's just a small sampling of the amazing vehicles that have been featured in the Final Fantasy series. What are your favorites? Best towns or locations in Final Fantasy? There are so many great points of interest in Final Fantasy that it's hard to know where to start. One of the first locations that comes to mind is Cornelia in the original Final Fantasy. It's the first town that the player enters, and it's also the first time they get to see the beautiful graphics that the game has to offer. It's also home to some of the game's most iconic characters, like the White Mage Saria and the Black Knight Garland. Another great location is Baron in Final Fantasy IV. It's a dark and sinister place, and it's the first time that players really get to see the game's villains up close. It's also home to some of the game's best characters, like Cecil, Kain, and Rosa. Of course, no discussion of great Final Fantasy towns would be complete without mentioning Nashi from Final Fantasy VI. It's a cold and snowy place, and it's the first time that players see the game's main villain, Kefka. Several of the game's events happen in this town, and the player spends a lot of their time there. There are so many great towns and locations in the Final Fantasy saga that it's hard to know where to start. These are just a few of the many great places that players will visit over the course of the series. Final conclusion about Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy has something for everyone. Whether you're a fan of the original games or looking for something new, the series has something to offer. With so many great games in the franchise, it's hard to choose just one as the best. What's your favorite Final Fantasy game? Let us know in the comments.